excavations of ancient Israel have unearthed an abundance of pottery, remnants of ancient daily life.
בערך בין 6,000 שנה. מה שאנחנו הולכים לחפש פה זה עצמות של תינוק. אנחנו רואים שהכד הוא מלא...
To determine if this jar contains a 6,000-year-old baby, archaeologists must send it through a CT scan.
וואו, יפהפייה. איזה גולגולת. פנטסטי. הנה כאן אנחנו רואים את הגולגולת. כאן זה עמוד השדרה, והצלעות הן פה, וכאן זה האגן. אנחנו רואים פה את הטיביה, יש פה עוד טיביה.
נראה לי הירך.
וכאן הרגליים שלה בעצם מקופלות. משוכן בתנוחה עוברית. המצב של העצמות הוא קטסטרופלי, אין שום סיכוי לעשות פה שחזור או רפאות. בסוף היום נצטרך פשוט לפרק את הכד הזה ולחפור את השלד החוצה.
Fortunately, all the pieces are here. They just need to be put back together. It's the first step in determining if this child was sacrificed. One of the greatest tales of sacrifice comes from the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac. The book of Genesis tells us that Abraham is God's most loyal follower. In return for his faith, God promises to make Abraham the father of many nations. But when God demands Abraham kill his son, Isaac, it goes against all his spiritual beliefs. Abraham faces an impossible choice. He must sacrifice his beloved son or defy his God. Our possible sacrificial child comes from some of the earliest ancient settlements in the Holy Land of Abraham, at a place called Fetzael. 6,000 years ago, this land was known as Canaan. According to biblical tradition, at the time Canaanites were living here, their tribes paid tributes to many gods with offerings of goats, sheep, and grain, and sometimes children.
My conscience came back after the request involving the children, and I started to refuse more and more. To put it carefully, most of these people followed a not very mainstream religion. So, you have Catholics, Protestants, all sorts of religions. These people, most of them, were Luciferians. And then you can say, religion is a fairy tale, God doesn't exist, none of that is real. Well, for these people, it is truth and reality. And they served something immaterial, what they called Lucifer.
Let me say first off that this is a court of inquiry. It's not an adversarial court, it's a nonprofit educational event. And with enormous energy and intelligence, all of us have been brought together to try to bring out some of the aspects. So if I may, I have prepared an overview statement based on my work these many past weeks. And I want to just say that as a parent and as a patriot, I'm absolutely outraged by what we're allowing to happen to our children. Humanity is judged on how you treat the weakest member of the society. Let me say that although pedophilia, which says child love, has nothing to do with the abuse of children, these children are not just kidnapped and in some cases bred by families as a cash crop. We have people in the United States of America that breed children in order to sell them. And when they are sold, they come without birth certificates, which means it's easier to kill them and have no one ask where they are. We're also importing children by the plane load. Again, children who have no documentation. It's not just child slavery or child sex abuse. It's also child torture because you have adrenalized blood. You have the whole blood drinking ceremony of the satanic world. It's also the use of children for harvesting body organs. We'll have the Falun Gong testimony tomorrow. One of the reasons that the Falun Gong are so popular is because they're so healthy, so that you can harvest their body organs and get the very best. And then you have ritual ceremonies and ritual murder, as well as incidental murder. But I know the system. I've been a spy all over the world. I have created the Marine Corps Intelligence Command. I have trained intelligence and law enforcement representatives, over 8,000 of them from across 66 countries. They're all, without exception, good people trapped in a bad system. And one of the most wonderful things that this court could achieve, now that we've had Pizzagate, for example, which opened people's mind, is we could achieve an opening of the public mind and an absolute imperative from the public to governments, including the U.S. government, which I think is the center of gravity in so many ways. I have found in my research in preparation for this court and all of the work that will follow that most organizations that end up being used to prey on children, Oxfam is a recent example, all of the United Nations organizations, the Boy Scouts of America, all of the child services agencies across the United States of America, they did not start out as organizations to prey on children, but they attract pedophiles. And ultimately, pedophiles end up rising in the ranks and controlling those organizations, so that an organization that initially started out in the service of children becomes an organization that is in fact hunting children. And one of our distinguished commissioners has written an absolutely wonderful book called Child Hunters, which I recommend to all of you as a brief on this. Now, it's not my working assumption, but the working assumption yet to be proven that the totality of the children disappearing worldwide is toward 8 million people, toward 8 million children. In the United States of America, the acknowledged number, not counting the children being bred without birth certificates, not counting the children being imported without documentation, is between 600 and 800,000 a year. Now imagine Africa and East Asia and all these other locations. I personally believe that the number we want to try to document is rising well beyond the official figures, and we have yet to learn what the actual number is. Okay? The other working assumption is how long do these children survive within the system? What I am hearing from the witnesses that I've talked to is 2 years. It may be longer. It may be 4 years, it may be 6 years, but by and large, these children are so abused. I mean, we're talking rapes by the hour and so forth, that they reach their expiration date within 2 years. And then they're murdered with impunity, or they're ritually murdered if that's what they've been bred for. So I think we need to document this. No one else has done this before in a systematic manner. This commission is rendering a signal service by seeking to do an overall view in the public interest. This will be a massive, massive undertaking. And while the preliminary attempt is to do a 6-month to 9-month endeavor, subject to funding availability and the availability of witnesses and also prisoners, there are a number of prisoners who can be debriefed, who, when properly debriefed by specialists, can really give a deeper understanding that has not been achieved by existing law enforcement and other agencies, because they simply treat these people when they catch them, in those rare instances when they catch them, as disposable goods to be thrown into prison and forgotten about. And tomorrow we will have some expert testimony from one of our commissioners who can speak to this far, far better than I. William Binney is my counterpart. He is for NSA what I am to CIA, which is to say, he is saying, as I am saying, that we can delete 70% of our respective organizations and put the other 30% to work. But Binney is also the author of Thin Thread, which is a way of doing deep discovery in unstructured databases and the internet. And so he is prepared to actually help us do pedophilia tracking worldwide. And one of the things that the other technical commission, Stephen Arnold, is very good at is de-anonymizing the internet. This includes every image having a fingerprint. So you can take an image of a child being abused, and you can track that image through the dark web. So there are resources that we can bring to bear in support of this commission's mission. My favorite technical commission is Arno Reuser from the Netherlands, who is a master librarian. He is so good that when the Dutch intelligence community realized it didn't know enough about the world, they recruited him to create the Open Source Intelligence Center for Dutch intelligence. And as with the endeavors that I helped create in the United States, and in fact for Scotland Yard, very quickly people found out that they could get 40 to 60% of what they knew very cheaply using open sources of information. That's not what government intelligence agencies do today. They want to spend as much money as possible in the riskiest way possible on the most expensive way possible. They're not actually there to do decision support or answer questions. So I believe that Arno Reuser is capable of creating the world's first digital library on pedophilia. And this would be a multilingual library to include local dialects. And it would be a library that would then end up being what we call a magnet for walk-ins. We want to have a very professional ingestion system so that people can volunteer to provide expert witness to the thing, or they can volunteer to offer up their papers. There are a number of pedophiles now who are actually ready to turn over their diaries. All right, so I think we're actually doing something really, really huge. My final comment. The center of gravity for taking down the deep state. Pedophilia is both the induction glue. Pedophilia is how the deep state recruits and controls people. It is also the Achilles heel of the deep state. I believe that once the public realizes that the government is not protecting their children at a scale of vulnerability that we can articulate, then everything else about the government is called into question. All right? So for me, this is a truly righteous endeavor. And I will end by saying that as much good as it might do to get the British angry, for me, the center of gravity for change is the American public. Because if you can get the American public angry, we will stop supporting dictators overseas. We will close all of our military bases overseas. I am on record as a former CIA operations officer saying that our 1,000 bases overseas are not there for national defense. They're there to serve as lily pads for the smuggling of guns, gold, cash, drugs, and small children. So let me say I am proud to be in your company, and I believe that no matter what we do or do not do, it is going to make a difference. God bless you all.
Our possible sacrificial child comes from some of the earliest ancient settlements in the Holy Land of Abraham, at a place called Fetzael. 6,000 years ago, this land was known as Canaan. According to biblical tradition, at the time Canaanites were living here, their tribes paid tributes to many gods with offerings of goats, sheep, and grain, and sometimes children.
My conscience came back after the request involving the children, and I started to refuse more and more. To put it carefully, most of these people followed a not very mainstream religion. So, you have Catholics, Protestants, all sorts of religions. These people, most of them, were Luciferians. And then you can say, religion is a fairy tale, God doesn't exist, none of that is real. Well, for these people, it is truth and reality. And they served something immaterial, what they called Lucifer. And I also was in contact with those circles, only I laughed at it because to me they were just clients. So, I went to places called churches of Satan.
So now we are talking about Satanism.
Yes. I didn't believe in any of this stuff, and was far from convinced if any of this was real.
It was just a spectacle to you.
Yes. In my opinion, the darkness and evil is within the people themselves. But then at some point, I was invited, which is why I'm telling you all this, to participate in sacrifices abroad. That was the breaking point. Children.
You were asked to do that?
Yes. And I couldn't do that.
Would you like to stop for a moment, by the way? world. You have a very strong background in the financial sector, asset management, deposit trading. As far as I understood, can you tell us something about your experiences? For how long did you work there?
Well, my experiences are more complicated than what you mentioned just now. Actually, I have been an entrepreneur my entire life. Independence being the key component to me. I have once tried being an employee, but that didn't work out. Being an entrepreneur, I have seen many sectors, amongst which I have experienced the financial world. All my other companies as an entrepreneur, like my own fashion line for ladies, car dealership and also import-export, had me involved to such an extent with building up my own fortune. It inherently guided me into the world of finance. Working in import-export, you encounter different currencies and you have to go to the exchange to trade through brokers. And one of the brokers said at some point, "Ronald, I've been looking at your life for a long time and you are always busy. You earn money, we know, but what is your goal?" And I replied, "The only goal I have as an entrepreneur is to earn as much money as I possibly can. Because, the more money I have, the quicker I can retire, be free and of course have status. Basically everything you want in this society, or at least, that's what I thought back then." So the broker said, "In that case, stop what you are doing now, stop with all those companies and just start dealing money, go into the financial world." And that is the beginning of that situation that is connected to your original question. The broker had a place in the exchange market and he dealt in currencies, deposits, so trading in assets to make money out of differences in interest rates, and that involved the aforementioned asset management. Those three aspects together formed the interested package I said yes to. He said, "All right, you can take my place here, I'll train you, introduce you into the network. But in exchange I want 10% of your annual earnings." So he basically sold me his spot in the financial world and asked a 10% commission, which I paid him. I said, "Yes, fine with me." Then he replied, "There is one thing you need to know. If you can't put your conscience in the proverbial freezer, and I don't mean on -18 degrees, but on -100 degrees, then don't get involved in this." That was the message. You want a lot of money, you can obtain that, I can help you, but it comes at a great cost. Because you cannot do this with a clear conscience. Well, I laughed at that. I was young and naive. From my youth, from the way I came into life, my far from ideal youth led me to develop a certain view of the world and humanity.
What do you mean by that? No warm, loving family?
My mother always did the best she could to make us feel loved. But she was hampered by that due to the behavior of my father, who caused us to feel more like we lived in a war zone with each other. That isn't an exemplary situation to grow up in. And as a child growing up like that, led me to believe that the world and humanity are far from great.
So putting your conscience in the freezer was fitting in as a starting point?
I was partially already used to doing that out of self-preservation. So to put my conscience in the freezer was not an impossible task to me.
So it became a survival mechanism to you?
Yes, yes. And my view of humanity and the world around me wasn't exactly positive either. I only thought of myself, that the way I grew up to be out of self-preservation, and I got into that deal. which meant that slowly I built up a customer base. And as I improved my skills within the network, I got deeper into the financial world. And then it turns out the world is really small, and you keep noticing that. Even when I was still working in import-export, dealing in grain and such, you notice it is just a small circle. And if we talk about the hardcore circle in the financial world, I don't mean Miss Jean at the bank, but the big global flows of money which you use for trading.
De grote geldstromen die op aarde rondgaan, waar je mee gaat handelen.
You are talking about worldwide cash flows, so not the Netherlands in particular where you started working?
The Netherlands do play a distinct part in this story, but the world does not revolve around it.
Nederland is niet het centrum van de aarde. Nederland is een onderdeel
The Netherlands are a part of a large global financial system, in which you work through exchange mark if you want to do official transactions.
Als je officiële transacties wil doen, kan je dat via beurs doen. En heel veel banken,
and many banks, who do the currency
de
exchange,
geldwisselaars zijn,
get certain assignments from clients, which they can't get away with easily.
moeilijk mee weg kunnen.
Then the need arises for people like me, who were the straw men where big money flows are involved.
Je kan ook zeggen de loopjongen van het grote geld.
We used certain financial constructions, international legislation, to move money in such a way making everything okay.
Het geld zo gaan bewegen dat het allemaal oké is.
So all supervisors, regulatory bodies that are in place worldwide, because they are. That no one wakes up seeing what is going on, like a year or two ago, with the scandal around Panama.
The Panama Papers.
Yes.
Tax evasion.
I think, well, it was about avoiding taxes. Tax evasion is when you break all the rules. This had to do with avoiding. But when you see what happened there, I'm like, guys, that is old news. And who are you bring with that, because it is peanuts and hardly relevant. However, for the common people, that is great news, but it is not anything big. But it does show there is something very wrong in this world. For example, there are people in the Netherlands, with certain positions, who have bank accounts in Panama, with legislation that allows them not to pay taxes in the Netherlands, which is completely legal. Constructions like that were part of my job. When we had to change currency, we had changes, the first boycotts in Iraq in the early 90s. When there was a boycott in Iraq because of the war that started there. And we were confronted with what we called Iraqi dollar. Iraqi dollars, which were actually American dollars. The American dollar has a direct relation to the oil prices, which made it a world trading currency backed up by oil. As long as that connection is in place, the dollar has a value. Officially, the Iraqi people weren't allowed to sell their oil due to the boycott. In theory, that is, because never before there was such a big business in oil. With discounts in this case, because officially it wasn't allowed, so with discounts it still crossed the borders. These dollars, because the energy was always paid in the dollars, so the Iraqi dollars had to go somewhere. You couldn't just take them to the desk at the bank because of all the regulations and checks that provide a certain protection. Because money laundering and criminality wasn't anything new back then. Now we call it terrorism. But that was then also the case. So, then you need people to take the heat. As straw men, you got invited to a bank, for example, in Germany's, with basements full of trucks filled with money. And then you think, sure.
Kan,
trucks,
transporten, een druk bedrijf.
transports, a busy company.
Kom maar even mee.
Come with
En
me,
als ze dan
then they
allemaal
show you they
vol
are
zaten
all
met
filled
aan de
to
bank,
maximum capacity with dollars. And
dat
they
ze
tell you
zeggen,
we
dit is
need to
allemaal
get rid
cash
of
en dan
all
weg.
this cash. So
Zorg maar
change
voor
them
komen, zorg maar
pounds,
voor 1000
German
mark,
marks,
zorg maar voor dit,
this,
dat, en het moet
that,
zus en
in
zo,
such
en
way, and
daar
it
en daar.
needs to go there and there.
Are we now talking
Nou, het
about money
verwerken van
laundering?
cash,
Well,
het verwerken van
processing
op een manier
cash.
dat
Processing
het,
cash in
dus,
such a way that we can
weer
legally
legaal
reintroduce it into the
binnen het
money
circuit
circuit.
terugkomt.
So that was your task?
Dat was een
That was
kwestie
an
die ik en
assignment my
collega's aan
colleagues
kregen.
and I
Hè,
got.
want je bent nooit alleen
You are
op je
never
werk.
alone on an
Collega's,
assignment,
je kan
because
dat
you
niet.
cannot do this on your own. It is
Dat
not
kan niet.
possible.
Je
We all
bedoel,
know
je kent
Scrooge
Dagobert
McDuck
Duck
scooping
met
money with his
zijn
shovel.
schepje.
Well, we
Nou,
literally had
dat
to
was
do that
letterlijk
over
daar gaan we
there.
met de schep
It
staan.
was
Dat
impossible
was
to process
onmogelijk om
all
weg te
at
werken
once.
in één keer. Dus
So,
dan ga je dus
then you need to
kijken.
find a
Vroeger was
way.
namelijk nog
Cash
normaal dat
used
heel
to
veel
be
met
the
cash
predominant way of paying,
tegenwoordig
where
is het
nowadays
allemaal
most is
digitaal.
digital. But you
En dan gingen we eens
tried to
kijken van
find a
hoe
way
ga
to
je die cash
process the
wegwerken?
cash.
Hoe ga je die
How do
cash
you
weer
reintroduce
op
the
dusdanige
cash into the
manieren
circuit so
in het
Iraq
circuit
can deal in
brengen
its soil without
dat
being
ook een land
hampered?
als Irak gewoon weer zijn zaken kan gaan doen? Hè? Want dat is degene die
Because they are the
uiteindelijk
ones that own the
heeft.
money. Iraq
En die
doesn't
wil
want.
niet dat...
Look,
Kijk, je hebt het
you
over een
mentioned
soort
money
witwassen, maar
laundering,
waar het om
but
ging,
what
dat
it was
dat
about the
Irak heeft een
boycott,
boycott, dan
Iraq
moet je
had to
houden
stick
aan
to
alle
the
regels.
rules, and buy,
En
you
door
know,
dus
everything you want to know about the
weet je, alles wat je
world.
in de wereld
You
wil
can know by
weten,
following the
kan je
money.
weten door de geldstromen te volgen. Dat is bottom line.
That is the bottom line.
Iedereen kan bla bla bla
Everyone can
zeggen,
say
maar
blah, blah,
zorg
blah,
dat je
but
de
make sure
geldstromen
you
volgt.
follow the
Dan kom je
money,
alles te
then
weten.
you'll find the truth. Same thing
Dat was
goes
toen
for
ook
that
zo. Dus het
situation.
enige wat Irak
So
wilde,
the
dat
only
is
thing
dat
Iraq
niemand
and their
ervan
buying
kon
partners
betichten,
wanted was
inclusief
to
de
remain
partners die
free
het
of any
kochten.
accusations.
Hè, want de
Because the
partners
partners
die
who
het kochten
bought
waren
it
degenen
were
die
the
embargo's
ones
hadden
placing the
opgelegd.
boycott in the
Ik bedoel,
first
het zijn
place,
allemaal
but
gewoon
they are
vriendjes.
actually all friends on the same
Dat
side.
denkt iedereen van,
Everybody
hey, deze
thinks
wereld
there
is
are
met,
opposites like good and bad guys in the
met
world.
plus en min en zwart en groen.
But
Maar
on the
op een
higher
hoger
levels,
niveau
it is
is
just a
het een
game
spel.
and they are all working together.
Maar ze
However,
hebben
they
zich
do
wel te
have to
houden
stick
aan
to the
alle
rules
regels
and
en wetten die ze
regulations
zelf hebben
they
gecreëerd om
themselves
de
have
rest
created to keep
van
the rest
de
of society
samenleving daar
suppressed
te
and
houden
make
en dat er
sure
niet
that it
erg
will
druk
not
wordt
be
op de
too
top.
crowded at the top.
Dus je moet
So
wel
you
volgens
have to
je
play
eigen
by your
regels
own
spelen.
rules.
Nou, dus hetgeen wat daar speelt, dat is dat je dus wil
So
dat
what is going on there
niemand
is
het
to
spoor
make
kan
sure that
vinden
nobody
of
can
kan
trace you,
volgen.
apart from the elite
Buitenom de
themselves.
top, dus
Nobody in
niemand
lower
in de
ranks can
onderlagen
find out what
kan
really
volgen wat er
happened.
nou werkelijk is gebeurd.
Compartmentalized, that's how we call it.
Yes.
Everyone knows only his own little piece. Only the elite knows what is
Maar omdat
happening.
wij zeg maar het
Yes,
vuile
but
werk
because we were
deden,
doing the dirty
moest je heel
work,
veel
we had to
weten.
know a lot.
Want
Because we
wij
couldn't
mochten geen
afford to
fouten
make any
maken.
mistakes.
How high in the pyramid did you get? Were you close to the top of the pyramid?
Well, we were communicating with them.
Voor
My
het ego
ego
is
would
het
have
wel
loved it
opgelegd.
when I got to this position of belonging to the top itself.
Tegenwoordig
Nowadays we still talk about
8.500
8,000 to 8,500 people in the world who run the entire world. It would have been amazing to get into such a position back then.
All right, but if we say the top knows 100%, can you estimate how much you knew and understood of what happened?
In my work, I had to know 100% of what was going on. There was no other way, because of the interests of the people involved were huge. Especially for the top. If I wouldn't know all the details, I would end up making mistakes.
Onherroepelijk fouten maken. En dat betekent dat je dus
Which would cause a spin-off, because those mistakes would be detected.
Dan gaan
Then
het
the
allemaal
people
mensen
that
die
don't
niet
know
weten
anything
gaan
about it would
spelen.
interfere.
Je praat
We are
hier
talking
over,
about having nerves of steel
bijna
to
een
function at this
menselijk
level.
zenuwstelsel hebben om op dit niveau te werken.
So did you have nerves of steel?
Het ging.
Yes, it worked just fine.
The freezer worked very well for
Dat
you.
heeft,
Yes,
ik heb, op
I
het
played at the
hoogste
highest
niveau
level
ongeveer
for
5
about
jaar
5
gespeeld.
years.
En
And then it was totally
was
over,
toen over,
out
uit
and
te
done with.
sluiten. Dat was een heel
That
heftig
was a very intense moment for me.
That happened suddenly?
Well, no, the
Nou,
thing
ineens,
is,
nee, het punt is,
I gave a
één
small
klein
example
voorbeeld
of what
gegeven
was
van wat er binnen
involved.
die binnen die handel speelde. Dus dat ging
So,
dus in dit
in
geval
this
om de
case,
omwisseling
currency
van
exchange,
valuta's,
dollar to
dus
something
dollar naar
else,
andere. Het ging erom
deposited
dat het
in a safe
veilig werd
manner,
weggezet, deposito's. En het
and
ging erom dat het
managing
vermogen
assets
goed werd
well,
beheerd.
so it
Dus
could
dat
grow to
beheer
rate of
ook,
return, leading to
rendement
reinvestments
kan
with the
geven, dat er
money.
meer investering kon gedaan worden met het geld. Het
The
niveau
level I
waarop
played
in
it
die
in
5
those
jaar ging
5
spelen,
years. And
dan
that
gaat
didn't
het
happen
leven elke
overnight,
dag, je moet
you
je
need
sporen
to earn
verdienen.
your
En
place.
ik had,
I am skilled at connecting the
ik
dots,
gaven
information
om
in
heel
order to
snel,
achieve
zeg
a
maar,
full
allemaal
picture of all
losstaande
the things
deeltjes,
involved.
informaties op een bepaalde manier met elkaar te combineren. Waardoor
That
ik een
need to be taken into
totaaloverzicht
account
krijg
within the
van
playing
waar ik allemaal
field,
rekening mee moet houden binnen het speelveld. Dus
which
zeer-
is a
zeer
very
gedetailleerd.
detailed process.
En
You stand
valt
out
op
when you are gifted
als je
in
die
this.
fase hebt.
This is the reason I was
Daarom kan ik
trusted
zeggen,
with the full
mij werd gewoon
100% of the
100%
information
gegeven
where it
op mijn
concerned my
werkveld, op
jobs.
mijn gebied.
So,
Is niet
I didn't
alle
know about
100%
everything they
gebeurd.
knew,
Ik wist
but
alles
everything
wat
that
ik
I
moest
needed to
weten.
know regarding the
Ik ging
case I was
100%
working
van
with
de zaken die
colleagues.
ik moest
I was
draaien
often
met
put in the
collega's.
leading
Daar had
role
ik een
because I
voorbereiding
kept a
in,
good
dus ik heb
overview
heel
of the
snel alles
situation.
overzag.
You're good at making quick switches.
Ja, en ik kon ook de
Yes, and I
innovatie
was
er
good
nog
at
in gooien
innovative
van
thinking
hoe
to
los je
solve
het
the
dan op.
problem.
Ik
I had
vond dat
fun
leuk. Ik vond het
creating
leuk dat
solutions
je
in
leerde op
such a
een
way
manier dat
to
je alles
always
iedereen
stay
heel
ahead and
slim af was,
outsmart
slim af
them,
was.
staying
Kon
within the
spelen met
rules
al
of the
die
game
regels
but
en dat was
playing
allemaal
around
ook
with
nog
them to make
kloppen.
everything
Het was ook een
match
heel
up.
leuk spel.
I
Maar
love
aan de
that
andere
game.
kant heeft het mij een
However,
hoge
on the other
verantwoording.
hand, you had
En
a
ik kreeg
great
steeds
amount
meer
of
te weten over de
responsibility and you
werkelijke
learned
wereld.
more and more about the real
Die in de
world,
financiële
since
wereld
through the
allemaal
financial
nog
world you learn all of the
Maar
actual
is dat
truth.
alles?
So
Maar
you
op
say
welk
all.
vlak?
In what
Je
regard?
klanten,
Well,
je
your
klanten, aan je
clients give
klanten
you
kon je,
glimpses of
kon
how the
je heel
world really
duidelijk een
works.
wereld ontdekken, hoe die in elkaar
In
zat.
hindsight,
Achteraf
I
gezien
still
wist ik
didn't
nog
know
steeds niet
everything,
alles.
but I did
Maar ik
know a
wist al wel
lot.
veel.
Because
Want
my
die ruimten
clients
waren
were
bewaker.
banks who didn't
Die
want
wilden
blood
dus
on
ook
their
de bank
hands.
schoonhouden.
But within those
En binnen
banks,
zo'n
there
bank
always
zitten
is a
een aantal
number of
mensen die
people
weten
who
donders
know
goed wat er
damn
allemaal
well what
speelt.
is going on.
Zeg
So,
maar,
like
1%
1%
binnen
within a
de bank
bank
weet precies
knows
wat
the
er
truth of the
werkelijk
matter
speelt binnen de
regarding the
wereld, wat er
happenings
wel of
within
niet
the world,
te
which
maken
is
heeft met
not
geldstromen.
surprising,
Maar dat zijn je
considering
klanten.
they are
Maar je hebt
involved in
ook
the flows
uiteindelijk
of
met
money.
overheden te
Those are
maken.
your
Je hebt te
clients.
maken
You
met
also have
multinationals.
governments to deal
Je hebt
with,
te maken met
multinationals.
geheime diensten.
You have to deal with secret
Maar je hebt ook te
services
maken
and
met
what
wat
they
ze
now
noemen
call
terroristische
terrorist
organisaties.
organizations.
Je krijgt dus
You get all
het
of the
hele
groups that
palet
are involved
van
with the big
groot
money as
geld
clients.
aan
Then you
cliënteel.
start
En dan
seeing
zie
the
je ook
connections.
verbindingen.
So,
Hè?
they
Dat
might be
staat dan los van elkaar, wat
compartmentalized
je net
as you
zei, hè?
just
Je weet een deel.
mentioned
Maar jij zit
regarding
er middenin,
knowledge.
dus jij
But
ziet
because
steeds
I
meer
am in the
van,
middle,
oh,
I
nu
see
komt
how
het
they
van dit
relate
en
to
dan gaat het
another.
naar daar
You
en
see
komt
the
het
money
daar, komt
coming
het weer
from
daar.
this place, then going to
Je krijgt
that
steeds meer
place,
informatie en
etc. You keep
overzicht over
gaining
wat er werkelijk
information and
speelt.
Dan moet je
thereby
ook
an
altijd
overview of what
klanten,
is really going on.
noem ik het maar even, dienen.
So do you have to serve and
Dus
keep all of
als we het
those
nu hebben
groups
over
happy,
terroristen en zo,
including
die
terrorist
dien je ook. Je probeert
organizations?
iedereen
You were trying to
tevreden te
keep
houden.
everybody
Ja,
happy?
Yes,
Mijn hemel.
ja,
My God.
dat
that
was
was
je
my
werk.
job.
De borden in de
Keeping
lucht
all the
houden.
balls in the
Ja,
air.
ja.
Yes,
En wat
indeed.
wat een
So
van de
one of
dingen
the
waar voor
things that
mij
I
de luik
found
open
out,
ging,
I did not
dat ik
know
toen
that
eerst niet
before,
wist,
but
maar
now
nu
am I
wel.
do, is about
Is bijvoorbeeld
secret
geheime diensten. Je
services.
denkt dan van
You
geheime
think
diensten
they are
zijn
there to
bang
serve
voor
and
het land
protect a
en voor een
people,
volk
country,
enzovoorts enzovoort.
etc., but they actually turn out
Maar
to
dan
be the
blijken dat
criminal
eigenlijk wat
organizations,
ze nu
to be
noemen
more
criminele
precise. The
organisaties
system is
zijn.
heavily
Althans,
so.
het systeem is zwaar crimineel.
Ja.
We are talking
Het
about
gaat over
financing
het
wars,
financieren
creating
van
wars,
oorlogen,
so
het
basically
creëren van
creating a lot of
oorlogen, het
misery in
creëren
this
van eigenlijk
world.
heel veel ellende in deze wereld. Hè, dus ook heel
So,
veel strijd.
lots of conflict.
En dan denk ik
And
van,
then I think to
jeetje, de
myself,
mensen
if
moeten
only
weten
people
hoe de
knew
wereld
what the
werkelijk in
world is
elkaar
really
zit.
like.
Voor die
Secret services
diensten
will stop at
is niets te
nothing.
dol. Niets.
Nothing. But they
Maar
also
ook
have their
hun
flows
hebben
of
weer
money,
geldstromen,
because if
wat
they are
hun
trading
de
in
handel van
drugs or
drugs zit,
weapons
of in de
or,
handel van
for that
wapens, of in de
matter,
handel
people.
van, noem het maar op, mensen.
All
dat
that
geld
money
moet
has to
ergens
go
naartoe.
somewhere.
Alles moet
Everything has
gefinancierd
to be
worden.
En je
financed.
zegt als, maar je
You
hebt
say
niet
if,
bevestigd
but you could
dat
confirm they are doing this?
Allemaal.
All of them?
Ja,
All of
allemaal.
them? So the entire world as we think we know it is just an illusion we believe in, which is something you find out in this line of work and where it all went wrong for me, to put it that way.
Right. You mean, finally that is.
In hindsight, yes, it was for the best, but my freezer started to malfunction. There were things happening. For example, I went to a different trade market and one of my colleagues there said, "Ronald, you remember that case with the Italian lira? I sometimes mention that during talks as well. Do you remember those deals? In which we did massive dumping of the lira, which reduced the value of the currency. Which caused a company in Italy to be hit in such a way. They went bankrupt. And then you hear at the exchange, you remember that successful deal with the lira? Yes. And then they say, did you know that the owner committed suicide and left a family behind? Things like that. And back then we laughed at it. Altogether, all of us. We looked down on people, mocked them. It was just a product, waste. Everything was worthless trash. Nature, the planet, everything could burn and break.
Just useless parasites.
Just as long as we met our goals, as long as we were growing, many of my colleagues ended up drinking or using drugs. Not me. Maybe I should have.
Or not.
No, in hindsight, it was for the best and I'm happy to still be alive. However, all those horrible things started to eat at me.
Can you give an example? Because I can sense a lot of terrible things happen to you.
Yes. It is difficult for me to talk about.
I can feel that, but only whatever you wish to share is all right.
Yes. I only talk about things I want to tell. But it does evoke lots of emotions, and with my conscience not being in the freezer, it touches me deeply.
Yes, I feel the same way. All right. Can you tell me the worst thing that has happened that caused the tipping point in your situation?
Well, that was the beginning of the end. You get so deep into these circles. And you sign a lifetime contract, not with blood or anything, to never disclose names of companies, organizations or people. I think that is why I am still alive. You have to stick to it. If we are talking about the worst things that I have experienced, I just told you about things that made the freezer glitch. My conscience started to show itself. Let's put it this way. I was training to become a psychopath and I failed. I did not complete the training and didn't become a psychopath. My conscience came back, and the most difficult part for me was, because I had such a great status there, I was a success. I was trusted with the people playing at this level.
Mensen in deze wereld die dus op dat niveau speelden.
To put it carefully, most of these people followed a not very mainstream religion. So, you have Catholics, Protestants, all sorts of religions. These people, most of them, were Luciferians. And then you can say, religion is a fairy tale. God doesn't exist. None of that is real. Well, for these people, it is truth and reality. And they served something immaterial, what they called Lucifer. And I also was in contact with those circles, only I laughed at it because to me they were just clients. So, I went to places called churches of Satan.
So now we are talking about Satanism.
Yes. So, I visited these churches, just as a visitor dropped by. And then they were doing their holy mass with naked women and liquor and stuff. And it just amused me. I didn't believe in any of this stuff, and was far from convinced if any of this was real.
It was just a spectacle to you.
Yes. In my opinion, the darkness and evil is within the people themselves. I didn't make the connection yet. So I was a guest in those circles, and it amused me greatly to see all those named women and the other things. It was the good life. But then at some point, I was invited, which is why I'm telling you all this, to participate in sacrifices abroad.
Dat was het breekpunt.
That was the breaking point.
Kinderen.
Children.
Dat werd je gevraagd.
You were asked to do that?
Ik kon het niet.
Yes. And I couldn't do that.
Wil je even
En
stoppen?
toen...
Would you like to stop for a moment, by the way?
No. And then I started to slowly break
in
down.
te storten. Ik had zelf
I
als kind
lived
nogal
through
wat
quite a lot as a child myself, and this really touched me deeply. Everything changed,
Maar
but that
de
is the
wereld
world
waar
I
ik
found
uitkwam.
myself in.
En toen
And
begon
then
ik
I
dus
started
dingen
to
te
refuse
wijzigen
assignments
binnen
within
werk.
my job. I could no longer do it, which made me a
Toen werd ik
threat.
een gevaar.
Voor hen.
I was no longer capable of functioning optimally.
Begon te rammelen.
My
Ik had dingen
performance
geweigerd.
started to shake and I had
had
refused
deelgenomen.
tasks.
Want het
I
gaat
had
erom,
not participated.
uiteindelijk
The purpose of
in
the
die
whole
wereld,
thing, eventually,
dat ze
in that
iedereen
world,
ook in hun
is
zak
that they have
moeten.
everybody in their
Dat ze
pocket.
moeten chantabel
You
worden.
need to be susceptible to
En het
blackmail.
chanteren van
And
mij was
blackmailing me
eigenlijk-
proved to be very hard if I look back on it.
Dat hadden ze
They
wel
wanted to
kunnen
do
doen.
that through those
Daar
children.
brak ik.
And that broke me.
Is dat...
Is that,
jij
you are
vertelde
not
iets
telling
aan
me
mij
something new,
niet om
what they
te doen,
also do in
wat ze in
politics?
de politiek ook doen?
Als je op internet
If you Google this,
gaat googlen,
you'll
dan
find
kun je
enough
wereldwijd,
worldwide witness
genoeg
accounts to
getuigen
know this isn't a
om
Walt
te weten
Disney
dat het
fairy
niet
tale.
Walt Disney verhaaltje is. Het is
Unfortunately,
helaas zo dat,
the truth is
wereldwijd,
that worldwide they have been doing this
het
for
is al van
thousands of
duizenden
years.
jaren.
I once
ook
studied
ooit
theology,
nog een stuk
and
theologie
even in the Bible you find
Zoals je
references
in de
to
Bijbel
these
kom je
practices with
tegen bij de
Israelites.
Israëlieten. Een van
The
de
reason
redenen
the
waarom de
first
eerste
10
10 stammen
tribes were
van Israël
banished to
land werden
Babylonia
gezet,
was because of
verbannen
these
werden naar Babylonië
rituals with
gebracht,
children,
vanwege de rituelen met kinderen, inclusief het
including the
offeren.
sacrificing of
Dus in die
children.
lijn,
So this is pertinent. All this
vanuit al
made
die
me
shit ben ik
believe,
ook gaan geloven.
because I
Dat ik
realized there was
besefte
more
dat
to
de
life
wereld
than
alleen
meets
maar
the
heen op
eye.
aarde
There is a
is
whole
werkelijk
invisible
een
world.
onzichtbare wereld.
It is real.
Gaat werkelijk
You
over
really do
duivelse
talk about a
macht en
dark
gaat ook
force and a
over
manifestation of light.
desorganisatie.
So,
Dus ik
I
ben ook
resorted
theologie
to
gaan
studying
studeren om te
theology
begrijpen
to
waar
make
dit
sense of
allemaal
it
over ging.
all.
En
And psychology as well, if I
Ja,
remember
alleen dat zat al
correctly?
in mijn
Yes,
eerste leven.
but that I did in my first life, because through commercial psychology, mass psychology, I was able to manipulate situations for my own benefit.
That is scary, because if you dig into that you find Tavistock Institute and mind control, MK Ultra, Monarch and the like.
Yes, that is correct, but that was all part of the job.
Zeg maar, in je werk zat dit allemaal.
Through training at the job, I got into that more deeply, because when you are making deals, you also need to manipulate the media.
Deals zet, moet je ook de media manipuleren. moet
You
heel
have
veel
to manipulate
manipuleren.
lots of
Want alles
things
moet
because
lijken
nothing
alsof
can be
het allemaal
seen as
niet
it
klopt
is.
en niet is zoals het is. Alles moet
Everything
anders
has to appear to be
overkomen.
something different.
Je kijkt
You
naar
see
het
the
volk
people as a
eigenlijk
flock
als
of sheep.
schapen
You put a couple of border collies and drive them in a direction.
Drijf ze maar, want ik moet
And to be honest with you, I still see that happening around me. People are still, through the systems and methods that we ourselves used to use, being treated in that same way, and it still works. People still don't understand how it really works and are still on the level of as long as I have my beer and whatever, completely self-absorbed, also a survival mechanism. I mean, it is the program after all. But you still see how stupidly easy it is to put people in a certain direction, when you are the one pulling the strings, that is.
Mass psychology.
Yes, and later, much later, in all those studies and discoveries, I found a document which they are claiming is bullshit, of course, the Protocols of Zion. And nowadays I recommend everyone to read the whole of that incredibly boring document. Just work through it, read it though.
We are also talking about Zionism.
Yes, of course. If you read the Protocols of Zion, and really study them and understand, then it is like reading the newspaper of the daily life. How from their position of ultimate power, and ultimate it has literally become. But that is only because the people don't stand up for themselves.
Niet opstaan.
They don't realize what reality is.
En geprogrammeerd
And we
zijn
have
om
all been
maar te zeggen,
programmed. If you dare to say you are against Zionism, then you are branded an anti-Semite.
dat proberen ze
The negative, you can say evil, the Luciferians, the Satanists. Whatever you wish to call it, it is a real entity. I have found that what is written in the Bible, and not just the Bible, you can find it in so many books. There really has been a moment of separation from the manifestation of light, in which a group went their own way and are carrying an intense hatred, anger.
Een intense haat heeft. Een kwaadheid heeft.
The people who do not underestimate the severity of this are but few. Because this is an all-annihilating force that hates our guts. It hates creation. It hates life. And it will do anything to destroy us completely. And the way to do that is to divide humanity. Divide and conquer is their truth. Humanity is a manifestation of light. That is the true creation. As long as you divide them based on political parties, skin color, you name it, then you, from a Luciferian point of view that is, suppress the full capacities of your enemy, their full power. They can't stand up for themselves. Because if that would happen, the Luciferians would lose. Then this monster, the greedy monster, would disappear. I tell people about this old American general who puts an entire room of people in the dark. The eyes adapt to the darkness, but you can't see a thing. The general doesn't say a word and suddenly he flicks on a lighter, one little light. And due to the prolonged darkness, you experience a manifestation of light from a single point and everyone can slightly see each other again. And then he says, that is the power of our light.
Beautiful.
Unite. Unite. Come together. And this entire shit story ceases to exist. That's how fast it could happen. But that is easy for me to say now. But then I was in a period of my life in which I was crumbling down.
Could you tell us something specific about that? How did that happen? Because you were invited.
I started to refuse assignments. My conscience came back after the request involving the children and I started to refuse more and more. I had a conscience and I couldn't function anymore.
But you did still show up at work after that?
I didn't really have a choice. I had my own business with several offices and employees. Everything was still rolling.
It must have been hard.
Yes, it got very hard, all the tensions. So, on the one hand you are playing with money on a high level, in which you can't afford to make mistakes. Otherwise everything falls down at once. Your entire business is ruined, everybody involved, including yourself. Then you are really screwed. So that brings a lot of stress, factoring in the resurfacing of a conscience. I was warned off when I got into this. Don't do it if you can't put your conscience at minus 100 degrees in the freezer.
And you probably realized that then?
Yes, I heard myself laugh at it back then, but it wasn't a joke at all. I totally did not understand where I really got into.
And your proverbial freezer was switched off?
Broken. I couldn't do it anymore. So, I tried to work through it, keep up appearances. I didn't know how to get out of this. I was trapped as well. Everybody was trapped. This all led me to crash completely eventually. My body just simply stopped. The first thing I saw was my mother crying at the intensive care.
You ended up at the IC?
Yeah, I really shut down.
You had literally crashed?
Yes. Yes. At that time I didn't believe in anything, not I can still recall how I saw, From that corner, I was looking down upon myself. I saw how they were working on me.
You had a near-death experience.
Well, you could call it that. I have seen I am not my body. I'm in my body. But I am not just my body. I have seen them working on me. And later on, I've been reluctant to talk about it for a long time. I really talked about it much later. But when I did, I had researched so many things already and started to believe. I was starting to better understand the spiritual and the material. At that point, this intense experience got its own place. The realization that I'm not my body. It's just a vessel. So, I lived through all of that, but I also needed a long time to recover.
Yes, of course.
Yes, I was a train wreck. Complete wreck. I was completely burned out. I had crashed and the body needed a year to recover. Because I don't really want to get into it now, but in those circles, I got tortured physically during my exit time. This was in order to make sure I would never break the contract of secrecy. So, I was taken for a certain amount of time. I was treated. All those factors together just increased the stress I was experiencing. Literally running full speed towards my own end.
Do you mean abductions, as well call it, or programming?
No. They exposed me to certain types of torture. That makes sure you'll never damage anyone in that world. I didn't realize that back then, so this is all from hindsight. It did all happen that way. So the end of my first life was so extreme that I couldn't handle it anymore. I couldn't handle it anymore. In no way. However, my mind power was so strong that it only happened within to my own body. That was, well, I didn't know what to do anymore. There were no options left for me. So that is why sometimes I think, of course that is not true, but I wish, like so many colleagues, I had taken the drugs and alcohol route. At least my end would have been more gentle, because most of them are just dead by now. Even though I know there are more strawmen walking around, there are little still alive whom I knew back then. Most of them are already gone. Well, I was dead too, but I'm still here.
So, you still have something left to do.
Yes. I suppose you could say that, but that is, I can't say in short, since I don't know how long we have been talking, the world that I found myself in. If you have any specific questions, then I can answer them, but I had hoped to be more concise, but I just don't know how.
Well, you have my gratitude for all you have shared.
To me, it is still a very big deal.